Hi everyone, I'm Rob, just a guy with a hobby and a love for music. Do you ever feel constricted by the traditional scales and wish you had more notes to play with? I'm going to go over a concept that I call fluid scales, where I'm essentially weaving in different notes from different modes and to kind of add a variety and some spice to whatever you're writing. I won't get super depth into what the modes are and kind of how they're created and all that stuff. Instead, a quick description is basically where you take a scale and you slightly modify it or modify some of the notes, either by sharpening or flattening them. I have a document where I have all the modes laid out for a C scale, and let's jump to that. Okay, so first things first, modes do not change the key at all, and they're not modulations or tonicizations. So what do I mean by tonicization and modulation? If we look at this C major scale here, the C is the root of the scale. This is also called tonic. So when you tonicize, what you're doing is you're changing what this tonic note is to a different one. Essentially, you're changing keys very briefly, and then you're coming back. So an example would be I'm writing in C, and let's say I want to tonicize to F. So I would basically swap to F. I would play an F for a little bit, dip my toe in the water of F, and just have a little bit of fun. And then I would come back to C, and we would continue back writing in C. Tonicization is just very brief. You aren't completely changing keys at all. You're just kind of going to the other key for just a minute, and then you're coming back. Now, modulation, on the other hand, is where you're full blown sending it. You're going from C, and you're saying, "Hey, I want to start writing an F now." So what you're going to do is you're going to go from C, and then you're going to start writing an F, and you don't have any plans of coming back. At least not immediately. You can come back later, and, you're not restricted to, ever not moving around, but the intent is not to just play a couple things in F and then come back. You're completely going in with the assumption of, hey, from now on I'm changing the key and we're going to be writing an F. So a mode does not change keys. You can see here that all of these modes, so C Ionian, C Dorian, C Phrygian, all of these start with C. This is the root note of all of these scales. So this does not change. Um, so now that we have all that kind of understanding, let's go over and let's actually start talking about these modes. You can see that the first scale here, the Ionian scale, is actually just the major scale. And then the other big one to point out is this Aeolian scale is just the minor scale. So this is C major and this is C minor. And then you have a bunch of stuff in between. And then the Locrian, which is kind of like the black sheep of the family. It's not used much because it doesn't sound all that great, and it's the diminished scale. So that one, yeah, I'm not going to even really talk about this at all. If you want to look into it more, you can. It's just not used much. So now that I've kind of gone over what the modes are, let's start trying to take a look at how we can use them and incorporate them into our writing. I'm only going to stick with the major-based modes for the rest of the video. I know that going between major and minor is probably the most common usage of the modes because swapping the dichotomy of major and minor is really nice and you can make some really cool stuff with it. But I kind of want to do something a little different where we're only sticking with major based modes. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to say that C major, C Ionian is the main mode or the main scale that we're going to be working with and what we're going to be writing with. But let's say we want to add some spicier notes into the mix, and we're going to use F sharp and B flat as well. So laying this out on a actual piano, you'll see that C, D, E, F, G, A, and B have green squigglies over them, meaning that these are the notes that you can kind of play whenever. So this is kind of like the bread and butter of whatever you're writing. Any of these notes will work at essentially any time. And now let's kind of get into adding the other two notes here, F sharp or G flat, and A sharp or B flat. This is kind of where my idea of fluid scales comes in, These are not part of the C major scale, but they're not out of key, I would say. They're kind of like extra notes that you want to use occasionally, or you can use them to add flavor to what you're writing. So these notes down here is basically like the vanilla ice cream, and these notes up here are basically like M&Ms or, cookie chunks that you add in to kind of add some nice flavor to it. So when you use these notes, you must resolve them properly, otherwise they're going to sound weird. And I'll kind of go over that in the demo here in just a second. But you have to be careful with these notes. These notes cannot be used whenever, otherwise it could lead to some really weird sounding things. And if that's what you want, then that's totally cool. But yeah, there's certain ways that you want to use these without really sounding completely off or out of key or anything like that, unless if that's what your intention is, of course. So I'm going to actually swap to using the piano now, and let's take a look at how we can actually use this. Okay, so now let's take a look at what we can do with these scales and the modes. So first I'm going to start off with just the C major scale. I'll play through all the different scales and we'll kind of see, we can hear the difference between them. So here's C major. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. For the Lydian scale, instead of this F, we're going to have F sharp, and that's going to sound like this. So C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. And then for Mixolydian, we're going to have a B flat instead of B. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. So now I'm going to just quickly play through all three of them without talking over it, and then we can try to listen to the differences between them. So to me, C major obviously is standard. It's just your typical scale. Lydian is a brighter version of it, in my opinion. And then regarding Mixolydian, it's kind of more of like a serious type of scale, I would say. I don't think it's super bright. I think it's actually not as bright as Lydian at all. And to me, the ending feels kind of minor, but it's not really. It's just because when you're used to hearing this note, it sounds minor or weird because you're just flattening something. So, but it's still a major scale. And I'll show you guys what we can actually do with this, with the difference of like the chords and everything. But first I want to go through and kind of like step through some, like a quick, very basic melody where basically I just play through some chords and we'll see how it sounds and like the changes between them. So before I show you guys the melody and everything, I just want to quickly go over a couple things to bring up about using modes. So a big no-no is essentially using the note that you're modifying. So for C Lydian, you want to stay away from using F, at least from immediately going from F sharp to F, or something like that. The other thing that you probably don't want to do is using notes from different modes in conjunction with each other. It can work, and it is possible, and there's a lot of different notes that you can work with, and as long as it resolves and it sounds good, then you're fine. But that really depends on kind of what you're doing behind the scenes with the chords, and a lot of the times this is going to be like something that's probably out of key. So you have to be very careful with that. But primarily what I want to focus on is not doing something like this as you have other chords and stuff playing over it. So just as an example, I'm just going to play a C major chord. It sounds really strange, right? And it's because the Lydian scale is not really meant to, like, F is now out of key for the Lydian scale, the Lydian scale. So it sounds out of key because technically is. So in order to get around that, you just don't use the note that you're changing. And but that doesn't mean that you can't weave these notes in and out of melodies and stuff like that. It just really depends on what you have going on in the bass line and how you use it. So the big thing is I would just stay away from stepping between these notes like this, because it's going to sound very jarring with the C scale. But what you could do is like something like this. Whoops. That sounds a little weird. I was just trying to create something off the top, but you can weave in these notes and you can change basically by a chord basis. That's the way I would look at it. So just weaving in the notes as you change chords and stuff like that. So like entire parts of a song don't have to be, relegated to a specific mode or anything like that. But I would say, just as like a general safety rule, stick with a chord basis. So if the underlying chord is C major, which ironically works for everything, you can kind of almost play anything. And as long as you're not, stepping into the note that you're modifying, then you're going to be fine. So now let's go over a quick little melody and kind of show how we can use the modes to change how they sound. So first I'm going to start off with a C major scale, like the C major scale, and the chord progression that I'm going to use is C, D, B, G, and C. So C is major, D is minor, B is diminished, G is major, and then back to C major again. So that sounds like this. Now I know this G sounds kind of strange, and it's because I didn't invert the note. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. It's basically where you move the note, like this G up here. So it should be. So it sounds better when it's inverted like that, but for the purpose of the video, I'm just going to keep the notes as they are. And what happens is when you use modes, so by modifying this F to F sharp and this B to B flat, it changes basically the underlying chord itself. So instead of D minor, now we have D major. And instead of B diminished, which is a pretty crunchy chord, we have B major. And then instead of G major, we have G minor. So now I'm going to play that same melody, so like that, but with using these modified notes. So it sounds different. I'll play through them one more time back to back just to really hear it, but you can tell there's a difference, and it sounds, it's just a different way of, it allows you to use different chord progressions pretty much in different notes. So here it is back to back. And that's really what the difference is with the modes, is it gives you more options and more chords that you can use that are still in the key of C. So you can borrow chords that will sound really good with C major, but you're not completely changing key signatures. You're not borrowing chords from other, you know, other key signatures. Now you can, and it that definitely works. But any kind of modified notes from the modes, all of the chords are basically guaranteed to sound good with C as the root or the tonic. So just kind of going over those that same melody, but from the chord perspective, we can listen to it like this. So I'll go through with C major first. And that does sound really weird to me playing it like that, so I'm just going to quickly modify this G to actually be uh, like that. So that way it sounds better. So I'll play that one more time. And then with the modes, it sounds like this. Or I guess I should have played that G as well. Hang on. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that the modes allows you to kind of pull in and use different chords and kind of add a different kind of feeling to whatever you're writing. So instead of just having everything in C major and being confined to like these 7 notes, or well, 8 notes, I guess, with the C here, it's really it's just an octave. It really allows you to kind of play around with different chords and different sounds. So instead of playing the same old chords all the time, you can really modify what it is, and it'll still sound really good. So obviously that was a super simple example, and I only used 3 modes, so major, Lydian, Mixolydian, but you could do this with literally any of them. So if you really wanted to feel cheeky and you wanted to work with Locrian, you could do it. I'm not going to say it's probably a great idea because Locrian doesn't really sound that great, but if you're going for a weird sound, then you could totally do it. One again, I want to reiterate that I would recommend not changing modes in between chords, just because it can get kind of weird, and if the chord doesn't match up with both of the scales, it's going to sound really off. And again, unless if that's what you're going for, but for the most part, you want to stick with one mode per chord that you're playing if you're going to swap it all. And this is kind of where the idea of a fluid scale comes into mind, is you're not limited to just one scale. You're not limited to just 7 notes. There's a lot of different variations of the scale that you can use, and you can weave in and out of it. So it's essentially just making your toolkit larger and allowing you to create a lot of different things, and you're not just limited to such a small subsection of that scale. And this works for any instrument, so this is just music in general. You can do the same exact thing on a guitar or any instrument. And yeah, that's about it. So let me know what you guys thought, and I hope you guys learned something today, and I'll see you guys next week.